Yeah, it's good to be back with folk from Center for Christian Studies and just be able to do this again. I remember doing it in person at the center and always enjoyed visiting there as well. And working at San de Soto, we had a good connection with Center for Christian Studies and just had a very fruitful interchange of students and learning activities, et cetera. So just really glad to be back here for this. And if you do have questions, you can put them into the chat. I won't be monitoring that at all because I'm a one track person. I got one track in my head, and it's the only one that plays. So uh, Marcy or somebody else can collect those, and then we could deal with those in the general question and answer later on. So I wanted to first of all say Saguli, which is our greeting for one another, and actually it's an inquiry, and the meaning of the word Saguli is your life force still going on? So it's an inquiry into your well-being, and the response to it is usually uh-huh or yes, and then skenagoa or peace, great peace to you is the response to that. So, and earlier when Maureen said the word sago, I responded quickly the way we did at the Longhouse, and I said skenagoa, which was or skena, scano, and it's a acknowledgement of the greeting, and then the word skena or scano, as we said it at Six Nations, was peace. So, anyways, that's just how I'd like to say that. And I really enjoyed my time being in Treaty One territory along the Broken Head River, and I'm glad now that the new keeper of the circle, the one who's taken my job, is from the Broken Head Ojibwe community. She's not Indigenous herself, but she's married to a member from the Ojibwe Broken Head Nation, Alicia Desjardins, and just had good conversations with her over the past couple of years, and been engaged in the work there ongoingly. I taught a course for them at the Five Oaks Retreat Center, and so it's just this is just a good reconnection for me. And what I wanted to talk to you about is a reparations response to the issue of the land conflict in Ontario at Six Nations. And I wanted to share with you this, and I'll go through a lot of information. So Scott has a copy of this, and so that can be passed on to you. And I'll go through it very quickly. And then, you know, if you have questions, you can note them, and then we'll try to deal with it later on. But this conflict happened in 2006, and it was renewed in 2020 during the pandemic. And it dealt with land outside of Caledonia that was a part of a land claim court case. In 1987, the land was put into the court, and we observed that it was being developed, and so that led to the big conflict. And so I want to talk about that. In 2006, we renamed the property. We had a name for it called Ganosono, which is Mohawk for the protected place. And then in 2020, another development that was nearby was named 1492 Landback Lane. And so those are the two conflicts I want to mention that precipitated this idea of a spiritual covenant. As I said, I'm in the chat, I'm from the Dish with One Spoon area. which is a wampum belt recorded here in this wampum belt in 1701. And when Europeans ended their conflicts and settled down in their relations, our indigenous people would get together. So Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people got back together and said, this is what our commitment to the land is. The land is the dish that feeds us all. And that little symbol in the middle is a spoon that is the right of access. And so that's where I am here, and on the Six Nations land along the Grand River. The actual territory for the dish with one spoon is basically southern Ontario, south of the Trent Severn Waterway. It includes western New York, a little bit of western Pennsylvania, all of Ohio, all of Indiana, the lower part of Illinois, and the lower part of Michigan. That was the dish, because that's the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee hunting territory. So that's where the agreement was made. Now, the conflict in Ontario deals with the original land that was set aside for us. Because all of southern Ontario was dished with one spoon, when Governor Haldeman set aside 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, it was already our territory. It was already shared territory with Anishinaabe people, and it was simply set aside for to make up for the 8 million acres that we lost in New York State during the American Revolution when we supported the British. So basically, we came over into British controlled territory, and most of the Six Nations came to the Grand River track, and so that's where we've been since 1784. And that little orange spot south of Brantford there is the remaining about 950,000 acres were set aside for us for our exclusive use. We have 5% that remain, and so that's the land that we were dealing with in the protest. In 1835, Canada wanted a road between Hamilton and Port Dover on Lake Erie. They wanted to be able to transport overland goods to get them to Hamilton and then ongoingly onto the Lake Ontario if they were in continuing a water journey. So we agreed that that this road that is called Highway 6 now, we agreed that a road could be put in through our lands, and it goes right through Caledonia and Hagersville. And we said that we were going to lease half a mile on either side of that road for 21 years. And so that's what we agreed to, but then it never ever returned to us. We never got the money, and Canada sold the property without our acknowledging us or accounting for the money. And so that's why the lawsuit was initiated. Well, a couple of ladies realized that, if we put something into the court in 1987 and nothing happens, then the courts are useless to protect our land. So the lady here in the sunglasses, Dawn Smith, and then the lady that is holding the sign, check your deed, is Janie Jameson. They were the two that came, and they stood in front of the bulldozers in February of 2008 or 2006 rather, and stopped the construction. And so the developers got their injunction, and nobody would receive that injunction because after the construction people left, then our people moved on to the land. There were some model homes started there, and people brought trailers, and so they moved on to the property and wouldn't leave. this church is right next to the property that was under development. And the pastor there, his name was Roy Hawkins, and a very good man. He's a part of the Baptist church community, and he was a reconciler. He would go out and, people were arguing or fighting. He'd bring ice cream to them and he said, let's talk or whatever. So he was just a good soul. And during this time of conflict, nothing happened to this particular church, even though the church services continued. To get to the church, you had to cross a barricade that was manned by the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, or the barricade managed by Six Nations from the other way. So, but they continued their services throughout that whole length of time. Well, in April of 2006, there was a police raid. 200 riot police showed up, and our people responded and moved them off the land. And then on the road, it's Argyle Street, there was this tire fire that was lit, and a black column of smoke is an international sign of distress. And I remember coming back from Toronto, and I was on the escarpment in Waterdown, and I looked over to the left and I saw this column of smoke, and I knew it was our people calling for help at Caledonia. Well, throughout the rest of that year, there was different, conflicts between the people in Caledonia and our people. And this is from Victoria Day of May of 2006. We had agreed to take down the barricades that were blocking the road. And when we did, the Caledonia people, for some reason, made a human barricade. They wouldn't let anybody through. And that led to even more conflict. And so at that same day, this is a picture of our people. And actually, I'm behind that barricade on the left side of the road as you're facing this picture. And I'm there with my brother-in-law and my nephew. And our people are simply saying, you're stealing our land and we're not going to let you. And somewhere along the line, an elder brought out a war club, and you can see it on the road there, and also a cedar branch, which is a symbol of healing and peace. And the statement to the people in Caledonia is, it's up to you. We can have peace. We were opening up the road before this, or if you want to fight about it, we're ready to do that too. And nobody from Caledonia picked up either one of those. And so this is a picture of the women who are the stewards of the land linking arms with one another, which is our definition of treaty. And all the people support and stand behind them. And that's how we managed to retake the land again. So that began conversations with Canada and Ontario over this land. And here we have a picture of an old copy of the dish with one spoon, and then an old copy of the two-row wampum, and then a newer copy of the silver covenant chain belt, and then a new copy of the two-row wampum, with our hereditary leaders basically reminding Canada, this is what we agreed to in the first place. We did not agree to conflict and fighting. We agreed to peace and mutual respect and keeping treaty. And in 2007 to 2010, I was hired by Mennonite Centre Committee Ontario as a part of their Aboriginal Neighbours program to educate the 26 churches that were in the Grand River Tract, plus the other, parts of the Mennonite constituency. And when I was introduced to our own traditional government by Mennonite Centre Committee Ontario, Rick Hill was at that meeting, and then we had lunch after our meeting, after he'd learned that I'd be educating the Mennonites on land claim issues. he asked me a question. He said, do the churches pay taxes? And I said, no. He says, good. Then they're not a part of the system. And what he meant by that was they don't pay property tax and they're not a part of that usual, homeowner and private ownership land registry regime of Canada. He then said these words that really kind of burnt their way into my heart. He says, wouldn't it be great if we, and he meant Six Nations, had a spiritual covenant with the churches? This is his language. It's not church language. It's not something that I came up with. Rick Hill said this. He says, where they could acknowledge Six Nations jurisdiction over their lands, their church lands, that they could have a renewable 900 or 99-year lease and then pay a token lease payment and then just do their spiritual work. And then he says if they decommission, the church lands could then revert back, or the church properties could revert back to Six Nations. So in 2007, I invited churches to Six Nations to something we called the Strawberry Festival, Corporate Repentance and Communion Service. And it was at the church that I was pastoring there, and I founded at Six Nations, called Faith Victory Church, where we introduced the idea to the churches about a spiritual covenant with the churches. And at this particular meeting, we had a Maori lady all the way from New Zealand, Cindy Ruakara, who sang, and she did her Maori thing where there's a real strong and powerful pronouncement as well as her song. And we also had Gabriel Geffen, who is a Messianic Jew, who was living in the Jewish quarter of Old Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem, a Messianic Jew. And so I thought it was auspicious that we had these witnesses from different parts of the world, from opposite ends of the world, from New Zealand, and then from Jerusalem. And so, there were only maybe 40 people that showed up for that first meeting. And then we held it again the next year. So we did it, we called it Strawberry Thanksgiving ceremony and then communion service. And when we did it this time, we actually set our church up in the style of the Longhouse, in the sense that there were two sides facing each other. And we actually had traditional singing and some dancers that danced as well. And then we served communion using strawberry juice and Six Nations, we call it scone. People refer to it as bannock, but it's not the bannock. It's scone. So we held that event, and a few more people showed up for that, thinking about this idea. But then, and so we continued this conversation from 2008. Rick Hill and I met with various people, including the Mennonite Central Committee Ontario, and in particular, Sterling Avenue Mennonite Church in Kitchener. And in 2020 was the further conflict called 1492 Landback Lane, another development. Same thing happened. It was called 1492 Landback Lane. Same tire fire, but a new generation of youth leaders who were there at the forefront. So it was like some of these guys were babies when that first conflict happened. The main leader or spokesperson for them was Schuyler Williams. And he actually, because he was a spokesperson, he would be the one to speak to the press. They laid all the charges against him. And so it looked really bad. He even pleaded guilty to their accusations. But after the judge heard about the treaty, about 7 generations, about making decisions now for future generations, for commitment to the land and community, the Turo Wampum, etc. The judge released him from all the charges. He was let go and he was made free because the judge says he's doing what he's supposed to be doing according to his beliefs and his laws. So that's what's happened there. That particular conflict is still in the courts too. So I would ask people, especially when I'd go back to Sterling Avenue, I'd said, what could have happened instead of more protests in 2020 if churches took up Rick Hill's 2007 offer of a spiritual covenant with churches? So Mennonite Central Committee Ontario picked up that ball and they said, okay, let's do it again. So on July 6, 2024, at the Six Nations Polytechnic, which is a post-secondary school at Six Nations, we had this event and talked about that spiritual covenant. And Sterling Avenue Mennonite Church came forward with their first step. They called it the first step. With 1% of their annual income, they brought a check for $4,000. 160 people attended. There were 54 churches represented, 11 denominations, 13 unions, which included teachers' unions, labor unions, and social justice groups. And then we followed it up last year at Six Nations Polytechnic wasn't available, so we did it at Rockaway Mennonite Collegiate in Kitchener. We had 170 people attend, again, 11 denominations, 6 institutions, including credit union, universities, Indigenous organizations, 44 plus churches. We didn't capture the churches that walked in that day, so there were more than that. Back then, last spring, the current amount raised, in this Spiritual Covenant with Churches Fund was $24,000. And my own home church, Meadowlands Fellowship at Ancaster, Ontario, committed 1% of their income too. So they brought a check for 2 checks rather, half of 7,500, and I went to deliver that second half with another representative of the church. So we've got another event coming up on June the 13th at Six Nations Polytechnic. And the reason we chose or working with Six Nations Polytechnic is because they can hold the funds. They're a nonprofit educational institution. They also have Deohahaga, the Indigenous Knowledge Center, where the purpose is the restoration of Haudenosaunee culture. And in that work, they have a Bachelor of Ongwahoe Languages, Mohawk or Ganyangahaga or Cayuga. You can get a bachelor's degree there. And they're working on a master's degree and a certificate program in those languages too. They're there to preserve and nurture Indigenous knowledge and wisdom and community-based research. So the reason we told the churches why we would choose that place to put the money, the church, through its assimilation processes, aided the loss of Indigenous languages and culture, and now can be a part of their restoration, so an act of reparations. So we just, gave them ways to give to the Six Nations Polytechnic. And what we also said, because more churches than just the churches in the Grand River Tract came, we said the principle can apply anywhere in Canada. A church could establish a covenant with the nearest First Nations community. In Winnipeg, 3 Mennonite churches already have pledged 1% of their annual income to there's 4 urban reserves in Winnipeg, or they're connecting with Indigenous community organizations. And then in our place in Ontario, Meadowvale, which is in Mississauga, has an ongoing relationships with the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and they're part of our community. And so they're also, doing something reparations wise. And then there's a church in St. Catharines, Vineland, and Ridgeway near Niagara Falls, who's beginning a dialogue with the Port Erie Friendship Center. So that is the idea, and the idea is, the church, since Canada is dragging its heels, a court case from 1987 is not resolved. And then all of the other conflicts that we put 29 claims into the courts in 1995. None of that's been resolved either. Mavis Etienne from OCA from 1990 says Canada's never done anything to resolve OCA. I said, why doesn't the church, who claims to be the conscience of Canada, do what's right and lead the way and show Canada what reparations looks like? So that's what we're involved in. This event in this year, June 13th, is going to be live streamed. Only 200 people can actually attend in person, so we're kind of limited that way. But we're going to live stream it on YouTube. And so anybody from across the country, and actually around the world, because this is something that people internationally are interested in too, they can zoom in on it. And I suggested to a couple of churches that they could, maybe zoom it in, and then they can begin to have the conversation and the congregation learn about it. And then they can hold their own strawberry social or whatever they want to have that morning on a Saturday morning, depending on where you are in the world. It could be coffee in the morning or supper in the evening, whatever. And so that's what our idea is. And so that's, I'd rather see something happen than nothing. Yeah, the Haudenosaunee world has, the traditional world has a what you could call a liturgical calendar, only it's really much like the Hebrew calendar. It's an agricultural year, and it's not telling the story of Christ, but it's telling other realities. And so ours has a cycle that begins in the new year, which is late January, early February, with the midwinter ceremonies. And then when the sap starts flowing, we have a maple sap festival. And then in preparation for gardens, we have the seed blessing time. And then we have the first fruit, which is strawberry. We have a Thanksgiving 1-day celebration for that. And it's kind of like the first experience of the care of the Creator and creation for us. And, sometimes after one cycle of harvesting has happened, this is the renewal of this harvesting cycles again. So strawberries are really important to us in that way, in that the strawberries come from the sky world, where the sky woman came from and came to this earth, and the seeds were planted and grown here on this earth. So we recognize it as a gift from the sky world. And also, there's a phrase that our people use when somebody almost dies, and they come back and they say, I almost ate strawberries. Because the picture is that strawberries line the path to the Creator's house. And so it's a part of seeing that as, that's a part of that sky world benefit and blessing to us here in this world. So uh, it was something that we used strawberry juice before for communion at Six Nations, and we just said, well, at strawberry time, let's call the churches together, because the churches have recognized the work of Christ in and the thanksgiving that's associated with the breaking of the bread and the serving of the fruit of the vine. And I said, let's look at this idea together. And the association was, because of that and because of that season of the year. So that's the origin of that and what it means to us as Haudenosaunee folk. First of all, we begin with the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, which is, as I gave that liturgical cycle, there's a Thanksgiving address that incorporates all of that. And it usually takes a half an hour or so to do that. So we open with that. And then we have different representatives, and we try to have, in recognition of the true wampum, we have the Haudenosaunee side of the presentation and work, and then the settler church side of things. And we try to have people who represent both sides, and it's kind of like a mutually co-led event for the rest of the morning. So we'll have different people. I will usually give a short history similar to what I've just given about, this is what this is all about. This is where it comes from. And then we'll have churches that will then begin to tell their journey. How did we get here? What did we do? For example, Sterling Avenue had to go through 2 iterations of leadership to finally come to consensus. There was initial excitement about the idea, but then the lawyers began to speak, and the city councilman began to, interject, and it killed the initiative. So they had to, go through another set of leaders, and Rick and I continued to work with them, and then they finally came to a place of saying, okay, we'll take the first step. It's that nobody signed any paper. There's no kind of covenant, it's just the first step. Here's some token lease payment money kind of idea. So that's where churches are at right now. And really, the spiritual covenant is a aspirational document. There's no lawyers involved. It's not a transfer of land at this stage. It's simply an effort to, be doing something in a substantive, symbolic way. $34,000 is nothing to sneeze at, and it should be quite large going forward. And really, so we give a chance for the Six Nations Polytechnic to describe the kind of work that they do as well. They have a knowledge center, so we're hoping that we could have some people visit that knowledge center and see some of the archives, the wampum belts, and some of the artifacts and things that they have in the knowledge center. And then we also have a table discussion time where people can begin to talk about their place in all of that. And we have different people speaking from the Indigenous perspective and some of the work that they do. Nations Uniting, which is the United Church work in Oswego, also shared what they do, and they brought some folk that were part of Six Nations, and some of those folk were not Christians either, and so they had an opportunity to say something, and then we give the logistics of how you can give, etc. And then we have lunch together. And then after the lunch, we dance. I told people at the beginning of our event last time, I said, no, we're going to end this with a dance. And I was expecting everybody to leave, eat their lunch and take off. Everybody, all 170 people, ended up in the gymnasium. And so we began to dance, and I used a Bruce Cockburn song. So it wasn't a traditional song. I said, this is just a friendship dance. And so we danced, and 170, and there were 11 denominations there. So United Church was dancing too. And the Christian Reform were dancing too. And all the left-footed people, they were dancing with us. And everybody was smiling. It was a happy time. And it was a great way to end our time together, because, that's what was all, this is what the whole thing was all about in the first place. We were meant to eat together and to party together and to celebrate together and enjoy relationship together. That's what the Two-Row Wampum was all about. And somehow we got off track on that. And we've been trying to tell Canada we want to party. And we can't party if we're the only ones dancing. So this is an invitation to you to come and join us in the dance.